Welcome to the latest of the PPA support group meetings. I wanted to say a particular welcome to people who might be coming new, and I know there are several people who will be new to this meeting just from my contacts with people in clinic. So particularly welcome, and I hope you find it useful. I'm Jason Warren, for people that don't know, I might not have been before, and one of the neurologists at the Dementia Research Centre, and particularly connected with the PPA support group. We have got a team of people, as I say, and an interesting, hopefully you'll find an interesting agenda. The agenda, what we're trying to do, I'll get off as soon as possible. We'll try to go through it. First of all, we kick off with a talk about nutrition and sort of issues with eating in PPA, and I'll introduce or give you a bit more about that before we actually start. We then, hopefully by about 1:15, moving to our segment In Conversation, where we're talking to somebody who's lived with PPA, or people very close to PPA, and particularly today focusing on the emotional impact of LPA, logopenic aphasia. And as usual with these things, people usually find there's resonance for them for their particular subtype of PPA, as well as people who might actually have that diagnosis. And then hopefully going to time at about 10:35, we should move to the experiences of living with PPA. Very excited to say we've got an external person who, by the miracle of modern technology, is coming to us from Sydney. It's Leanne Ruggero, who I'll introduce a bit closer, who's got a particular interest in quality of life. So very, very welcome, very pleased to be able to use this sort of forum to have external luminaries, as well as people closer to home. And then about 11:15, we move to which is a recurring thing that we try to do at the end of the meeting, Q&A session that Chris Hardy will be chairing. I will say up front, because otherwise I'll certainly forget my adult state, that I'm so grateful always, and I think many of you know them anyway, but to the team who organise these meetings, and Chris, sort of particularly with respect to the scientific content, is very, very much a guiding influence there. Nikki Zimmerman and team for kind of the general running of the rare dementia support, particularly the public face of it, and Alicia Willoughby and team for the technical aspects of setting up the meeting. So very grateful to the team for their work behind the scenes, largely behind the scenes, getting the meeting together. So what we should then do, I think, is move on to the first of our talks. So nutrition and diet and eating are a very big deal for many people with PPA, and I certainly don't need to tell you all of that. And we're very excited to say, so we've got today talking Alison Smith to this topic, and Alison is prescribing consultant dietitian, and she's mainly based in the Harts Valley, but she's got a special interest in dietetics and dietary needs of older people. She's had a string of appointments where she's looked at particularly the quality of care delivery in this area, and she's been a clinical dietitian for over 20 years, I think, and for the last few years working as a prescribing support dietitian within a clinical commissioning group. So potentially a very good person whose ear to have for sort of talking about experiences and sort of passing on thoughts about this problem. And her main role has been focusing on prescribing of all the different aspects of things related to nutrition, but particularly when nutrition and swallowing is impaired by neurological conditions, and treatment of people who may have encountered problems with malnutrition. As well, And then, of course, the various knock-on problems with swallowing and other neurological things that people with complex neurological disorders get. So I'll get off very shortly, but I just wanted to say also, just because of the way we're running the webinars, this is a slightly more general point. There's a we need to put these things together, and of course there's a need for some editing of videos and so on before we actually show them to you. There's the sort of pre-recorded videos, which we found over time often works quite well, but it does mean that you're sort of seeing something that was edited from a much longer video, and so some of the kind of normal spontaneous banter and interaction that you might get will not be necessarily there. So just ask you to keep that in mind when you sort of see the video. It's a slightly prepared situation. And the other general comment is that this goes for a lot of the things we show here. A really important thing I'd quite like people to try and keep in mind is that everyone's experience of these conditions is different. I mean, this is true of all dementia, but particularly for PPA, where we know they're very diverse conditions. And actually, even knowing how different people move through PPA at different rates with different problems arising is a very big deal. So when you hear people talk, while it's extremely helpful to hear people talking about experiences and sort of making comments about particular conditions, it is very important, I think, just to keep in mind that their experience may not be your experience, in all particulars. And things that we might say about advice and helpful strategies, etc., or particular issues that we raise, may not necessarily be your issues, or be telling you where you will be or your family member will be in some years' time. So just to keep that in mind. But hopefully, with that slight cautionary note, what you hear today will actually be practical use, and there's an awful lot of good sense that goes into the talks that we prepare. So I think at that point, I'll get off and go to our first talk from Alison.
So I'm Alison Smith. I'm a prescribing support consultant dietitian, which tells you very, very little. But basically, my specialism for a very long time has been older people's nutrition in the community, and that has included for a long time swallowing difficulties, and it's also included dementias as well. So that's very much my area of interest and expertise. Yeah, it's always a really tricky one, and I think a lot of people get very worried when somebody loses their appetite, because obviously for all of us we see that as being a bad sign, which undoubtedly it is, but it's really about working out for the person themselves what's going to work for them. People losing their appetite, it's finding, is there a time of day when actually they do eat a bit better? So do they maybe eat better in the mornings, or is it something that sort of, during the afternoon the person is more likely to eat? Are there situations in which the person might eat a bit better? Do they eat better if they're in company compared to when they're on their own? Do they eat better if they have a few prompts to sort of think about what to do? Because obviously in terms of the sequencing, as you say, it might be that they're simply not really sure what they're meant to do at the point that they are in the meal or the snack, and therefore a bit of assistance to help them to sort of almost get back on track might be the thing that's needed in that situation. As we said, it's very much working with the individual person to see sort of what's going to work for them. In terms of sort of encouraging appetite, it's very much about saying what is it the person fancies eating. So we all know, if sort of in the situation where you're not feeling very well, you don't want to eat a great big meal, and there may be particular things that you really like. Often they're things you associate with not being well when you're a child. They're things that your mum made for you that are just associated in your head with, I feel better, not because nutritionally there's anything magical about the food, but simply because it's the association of care that goes with it, that my mum made this for me and therefore I felt better because I felt cared for. So it's thinking about, are there things like that the person likes? Are there particular foods that they, that have very positive connotations for the individual? So for example, is it something that, they would always have, I don't know, a piece of cake when they sort of, when they were celebrating something, and that's something that they will always have. Somebody I worked with, it was very difficult. She had lost her appetite. It was very difficult for her to eat. She really found it difficult to start the process of eating, but her husband found that if she had ice cream, she would start eating and then she would eat her main meal. So we said, great, ice cream first then, so it's an ice cream starter. And for that particular lady, it worked really well. It sounds odd. It sounds it's out of sync in terms of how we eat our meals, but actually doesn't really matter. She, she still had all of her nutrition and she enjoyed it, and it was about helping her to start the process. So it's really looking at slightly sort of odd or slightly sort of unorthodox ways of doing this. It really, there are no hard and fast rules. You don't have to stick to table manners. You don't have to stick to the order of meals. That isn't an absolute necessity in life. But sometimes it's having almost been given that permission to go, it's okay to do things a bit differently. It's fine. And again, it's thinking about sort of where the person feels comfortable eating. If they don't feel comfortable, obviously we'd say if you can sit up to a table to eat and drink, because we know that that helps with swallowing. But if the person really doesn't feel comfortable in that environment any longer and might feel more comfortable sat in a different place, that might be the place to go for to eat. It might be that the person needs some other distraction in the background to help them not focus just on eating. But equally, it might be that some people do need to just focus on eating. So again, it's very much working with the individual to find out what is going to work for them. And that might change over time as well, which is, it's one of those things that it can be quite challenging working with a loved one who things change, but it's trying as much as you can to sort of keep a bit of an open mind on this one and kind of go, we'll just go with what they will manage, what they're prepared to have. Yeah, it is very challenging for the person and for their loved ones as well. I think some of the things that can help are at a mealtime not having lots of other things on the table if the person is sitting at a table to eat, because obviously it can be quite hard to, if you're struggling already to recognise what is a food, if there's a little vase of flowers there and there's a napkin and there's sort of a cruet set and all of these other things, actually which ones are food, which ones aren't. I've come across situations in the past of people basically taking flowers out of vases and trying to eat those because they're on the table, therefore it must be food. And so it's about thinking, sort of, we try to make tables look pretty, to look nice, but sometimes it's about saying, less is more. So enabling the person to just have the food there so that they can focus on that. But it may be a case of needing to help them to understand what's there. So describing the food, talking about it, potentially talking about the colours of it. And one of the things that can really help is the contrast between the colour of the food and the colour of the plate, so that it's really obvious that there's something there, so that everything isn't kind of blending in together. But equally, if you've got a plate that is very floury, that can be confused with food as well, because you've got kind of too much visual information there. So it's sort of a plain coloured plate with contrasting coloured foods can sometimes be helpful. But it's very much working with the individual to find what's actually going to work for them. I know that some people do struggle with sort of being able to distinguish the smell of food as well. So it's working out, is a smell going to help them, or is it actually something that they're going to become even more confused about? Because sometimes, particularly if it's a mealtime coming up, being able to smell that food is being prepared can be really helpful for some people, but for others that might not actually be meaningful if they don't really associate that smell with a food. If you've got sort of strange food fads, things that people are obsessed with just eating a particular type of food, some of it's about thinking about, well, what sort of food is it? So if it's something I've come across in the past where somebody literally, all they will eat will be sandwiches. Well, okay. What sort of sandwiches are we talking? If it's got something like, basically a protein filling, say cheese or meat or fish or whatever, well, actually, that's fine. There's, yes, there's no fruit and vegetables there, but actually there's a good source of carbohydrate from the bread. There's a good source of protein from the filling. And actually, that's okay. If you've got somebody who literally all they will eat will be, I'm trying to think of something, biscuits, for example, yes, that's not going to be quite so brilliant. So it's a case of seeing what else you might be able to introduce, what else the person might be able to eat with it, or giving other ideas for things that the person can have. I think the other thing is that if you've got a situation where the person is just going to continue to eat these foods, it's never going to be forever. They're not going to do this forevermore. So, and the body is quite resilient, so it can put up with having the same sort of food for some time, but it's doing everything you can to enable the person to maybe try some different things. The other situation that you can think of is if you're thinking, I'm really not sure this person's getting all of the vitamins and minerals that they need at this time, what you might do is think about buying a 1-a-day multivitamin and mineral tablet for them. You can buy them in any supermarket, you can buy them in pharmacies as well. And actually, as long as the person's able to safely swallow a tablet and is willing to take it, then that can be helpful to know that they're getting plenty of vitamins and minerals at the point while they're sort of basically eating a very limited range of foods. But it's always trying to find other foods that are similar that they might start to basically eat a little bit more of as well. So again, it is trial and error, and it's finding what works for the individual, but there are usually things that you can try that will work at least some of the time. You're never going to completely change things, but if it works some of the time, that's better than it working none of the time. So obviously the first thing with swallowing problems is, have they seen a speech and language therapist to be assessed? Because it's a really important thing. As dietitians, when we work together with speech and language therapy, with anybody with similar situations, similar problems, we would always be asking, as a dietitian, has the person seen a speech and language therapist first? Because we want to know as a professional what the speech and language therapist's advice has been, so that we can complement that. Because the last thing that as professions we want to do is give conflicting advice to a person or to their loved ones, because that helps nobody. So that's the very first thing I would be saying. The second thing is obviously working on the basis of what the advice that's been given by the speech and language therapist. We then work with the person to see how to meet their nutritional needs based on that advice. So if the advice has been, for example, to modify the consistency of food, so as you said earlier about sort of minced or mashed food, it's talking about, well, how do you achieve that practically, and also how do you make sure that that food has more nutrition in it. Generally speaking, there is a desire not to go to pureed food if at all possible, which I'd completely stand behind too. But if it is necessary for somebody, one of the really key things with pureed food is making sure that it's nutritionally sound, which is harder than it sounds, and also making sure that it's flavorful, as you've already said, Anna. So this is a really important thing. A lot of times we sort of see pureed food and think, oh yes, well that's fine. I remember many moons ago, this is a very long time ago, I hasten to add, seeing a cook and the staff, it was in a care home, and the staff in the care home said, the pureed food's awful, it has no flavour, people won't eat it. People with dementia are really struggling because there's no flavour to it. So I went and had a chat to the cook in the care home, and I sort of said, this is what the staff are saying, you know, kind of what do you think? And he said, oh, the puree food. Oh, I said, do you try it? And he said, oh no, it's disgusting. And I thought, okay, there's our problem. So actually he's got normal taste buds, normal taste reception, and he isn't even bothering to try the food because he thinks it's revolting. Well, if you think it's horrible, the person who is going to have to eat it is certainly going to think that too. So it's about testing the food, tasting it. What does it taste like? Does it look nice? It's the appearance, but it's also the nutritional content. Because when we puree food, you do dilute the nutrition in it because you have to add fluid to a food to puree it. So you dilute the nutrition and you can dilute the flavour as well. So it's really maximising the flavour added to food. So it's using some herbs and spices to add extra flavour, but it's also using ingredients that will add extra nutrition. So rather than pureeing things with water, it's pureeing them with sort of sauces, pureeing them with sort of fortified milk. Remember we talked about the fortified milk, the 4 tablespoons of skim milk powder in a pint of milk, using that to basically as the liquid. So it's really looking at trying to get as much nutrition into the food as possible, because obviously the more difficulty somebody has with swallowing, and if they do need to have puree diet, it's a significant level of difficulty swallowing, the harder work it's going to be to swallow, so the less food they're probably going to end up eating. And so what can look like a lot of food spread out on a plate, if we gathered it all together and squeezed all the liquid out of it, it wouldn't actually be that much food. So we want as much nutrition in there as possible. So again, generally speaking, dietitians working in this field will be able to give advice about how to really fortify foods, how to really add extra nutrition to foods to make sure that the person can maximise their food intake. But it still comes down to pleasure. It still comes down to enjoyment at the end of the day. So doing as much as possible. And as Anna said, we try very hard not to go for pureed food if we possibly can. It's just a case of if you do have to go there, there's certain things to think about.
Right. So thank you very much to Alison. Just to say, the ghostly voice that was with Alison's on that video is Anna Volkmer, who was a victim of our pre-editing. Anna, most of you know, I guess, or many of you will know, is a very specialist speech and language therapist who's got a particular expertise in PPA and currently runs the speech and language clinical service for PPA, is heavily involved also in the support group. So not to kind of pass over Anna in all the excitement. Right. So we now have to move along. It's a very great pleasure to introduce this segment. So this segment, we try to get, some of you old hands will know, we try to get people talking about first-hand experience of living with PPA, some aspect of that. And in particular, today we're interested in the, really significant issue, very, very challenging issue of the emotional impact of the illness. And the two discussants who will appear are, first of all, Elaine Eager. Now, Elaine is the wife and care of Paul, one of our patients, logopenic aphasia, been in that role for about 8 years. And he was diagnosed at age 56, having had symptoms for 3 years, and is now living in a care home. So talking about her experiences, and talking to Hannah Gardner, who I think people are probably getting to know. Hannah is our Admiral nurse. Been working as an Admiral nurse for a number of years, but particularly now in her role with rare dementia support, supporting families into the later stages of the illness. So this is a very important, but also very, very challenging topic. So I'm very happy to, either within the meeting, but more particularly looking forward to debrief if there are concerns and things that are raised by this talk, because it's an important but a tricky one to think about. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Hannah and Elaine.
Well, thank you very much, Elaine, for coming today to talk about your experience of the emotional impact of getting a diagnosis, your husband for his diagnosis, and coming to share your experience. I know it can be quite an emotional time to express and put into words how you feel, but we're very grateful for your time today to come and share. I was wondering if you could just give a little background so our members can sort of understand your situation.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Hannah. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, my husband Paul, he has logopenic primary progressive aphasia. He had his diagnosis in 2013, but I noticed some little symptoms way before that in 2009. He was a retired police officer, and at the time of his diagnosis, he was working as the manager of victim support at Wimbledon Magistrates Court. And yeah, he's now living in a care home. We're that much further down the line. But yeah, it was a long, hard slog to get the diagnosis. But once we actually got the appointment to see the neurologist, it was only a couple of months. So that was quite good.
Okay, well, thank you. I know sometimes that journey of getting that diagnosis can feel quite a long time. And I suppose once you get that diagnosis, your reaction is you don't know how you're going to feel. How did you feel once you finally got that diagnosis?
This might sound strange, but I was quite relieved because in about 2009, as I said, symptoms had started to manifest. And on one occasion, I can't even remember what I had asked him to do, but I had asked him to do it several times, and he just kept forgetting. And I jokingly said, "Oh, I think you've got Alzheimer's." And he laughed, I laughed, and we just sort of carried on as normal. But there was this thing in the back of my mind for all this time that there was actually something wrong. So when we did get the diagnosis, I was actually quite relieved to know that there was something physically wrong with him, and he wasn't just being, belligerent or not caring anymore, but there was something wrong.
Definitely, sometimes that you feel surprised by that diagnosis, your emotions can, you've got some taken back, and sometimes people can be surprised how they react in that sense of relief. But now we've got that diagnosis, we know what the future might hold and planning. Did you feel that sort of surprise to yourself
I wasn't surprised at the diagnosis as much as relieved, but since then I think I've felt every emotion under the sun. I've gone from being relieved to being angry, to be agitated, happy, because we've had some really good fun times. But yeah, you just feel an array of emotions, and you're on an emotional roller coaster, really.
I suppose that impact, isn't it? That's that impact that has on you as a person, and the impact on the people around you. The challenges of sharing that information as well, and other people's reactions. When you came to tell family and friends around you, how were their reactions?
People reacted differently. Some people, I was quite surprised at the reaction. A few of my friends had noticed that there were problems, and so they weren't surprised, and they were very supportive. The children, that was harder because they were younger, to explain to them that Dad wasn't well, you know, and what was going to happen, as far as I knew what was going to happen. And I think the biggest surprise for me, the reaction that I got from Paul's parents, was one of, well, to me, they just didn't seem to bother. They wanted to know about young onset dementia and what the condition was. And I was able to tell them that, but then they just seemed to get on with their lives. Oh, it wasn't happening. It wasn't really spoken about. They didn't ask me how things were going, how Paul was. They were very sort of matter of fact about it. And they were the people that surprised me the most. But as time went on, I've realised that was their way of coping, because it must be awful to have your child be given a diagnosis of young onset dementia and to watch them deteriorate. I mean, I can't imagine what they are going through. But it was really strange. I found it quite weird to begin with. I thought, you know, they're not showing any emotion. They don't seem to care. But I know now that wasn't the case. That was just their way of dealing with it. Friends have been great. Neighbours have been great. There have been people who have found it difficult because they don't know what to say. And when Paul could still communicate, they just didn't know what to say to him. And those friends sort of fell by the wayside. And I don't blame them at all. But other friends, they've gone above and beyond to be helpful and supportive. So yeah, it's been a mixed bag of emotions, and telling people right at the very beginning, we were honest and open with everybody. Paul and I spoke about it, and we didn't feel that there was any point in trying to hide that there was something wrong, because as time went on, it was clear that there was something wrong, although he looks, and he still looks, fit and healthy. So what's the point of denying it? That was our way of dealing with it. We might as well just get it all out in the open, and, you know, if people want to deal with it in their own way, good and well. But this is how we are going to deal with it as a family.
Yeah, I suppose it's when someone's younger, isn't it? People don't expect it, and people's reaction, isn't it? When they look so fit and well, but you can see a decline when it's to do with language, and it's not a typical type of dementia, that emotion, and it must be very challenging and hard. I suppose from the different stages as well, from his first diagnosis to now, and very difficult.
Yes, it was. We always tried to explain everything to people that wanted to listen, especially friends and family. They would say, oh, you know, is that normal in the progression is to do things like that? And I would say, well, you know, everybody's different, but this is what Paul's doing at this moment in time. And we've just got to go with the flow. It's very difficult for those people that are on the outside, not sort of in the family as well, to understand what a diagnosis means.
What advice would you give to someone in a similar situation from your experience, or something you wish you had known then that you know now?
I've gone from being a very organised person. I used to plan everything out. Everything had a place. I was ultra neat and tidy. Now I'm not like that as such. For my own sanity, I would say, I had to learn to go with the flow somewhat, to try and put things in place and sort of get your life organised. So right from the very start, Paul and I sat down together and we spoke about everything. We had a marriage that was great, and we always spoke about everything under the sun we would have a conversation about. So that was how we carried on right from the very start. We spoke about everything, about his wishes, what he would like. If it got too much for me at home, what would he like his care to be? And he said straight away at the start, he said, I don't want you making yourself ill to look after me. I want to go into a care home. So that was from the very start, he said that. And we spoke about things like his future wishes, about his care plan, about what he wanted to do with the future that he had, things that he would like to do. We spoke about funerals. We spoke about donating his brain, everything you can imagine we spoke about. And I took notes, and I've still got them, and they're all in the folder and everything. And I think that was his way of making things a bit easier for me in the future.
I think that advanced care planning is very important, isn't it? So you feel prepared when things progress and the disease progresses. You've spoken about it, and that must bring you a lot of comfort knowing that you're doing things in his wishes. And so did you meet other people in similar situations, any of the RDS groups or anything like that?
In the beginning, we joined the group at St George's, and that was where we were introduced to rare dementia support through Nikki Zimmerman. And we did, Paul and I did come to a couple of the face-to-face groups at the Welcome Centre. But unfortunately, as I say, Paul's now in a care home, and then we've had lockdown and everything. So, but I still do the webinars and things like that. And I've met some lovely people, and you make friends because there are people that are in a similar situation to yourself. And it's good to know that you're not alone, because it can be a very lonely place to be. You think you're the only person in the world that is having these problems, but you're not. There are so many lovely people out there that are just in a similar situation to you. And it's nice to be able to have that support from somebody else that's got that experience.
The power of sharing and meeting people in other situations, isn't it? And sharing like your experiences now is for you as well, to offer that experience. It helps, doesn't it? And to share and learn from other people and know that you're not alone in the emotions that the diagnosis has and the impact on the family. And especially, like you said, when you've got children as well, and dementia doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone and around, isn't it, as well? And so any other tips or anything you would advise to any members listening, and especially coming out of sort of COVID, still very current, isn't it? The stress that causes alone on carers as well. And
I found it very stressful. Paul went into the care home in March 2019. So I had a few months of him being in the care home. And then just before lockdown, I had to come to Scotland because my father was ill and my father died. And I came back to London 3 days before lockdown. And then all of a sudden we were in lockdown, so I couldn't see Paul. And I was up in Scotland for 2 months before that, helping look after my father. So it just seemed like I hadn't seen him for ages. So when I did get to see him, it was a huge relief, and I was excited, and I had all these emotions. And And excitement was the biggest thing, I think, because I hadn't seen him for such a long time. And because we couldn't FaceTime or anything like that, because he just can't use technology and he can't speak properly and things like that. It was just impossible. So it was lovely when they started to lift the restrictions. But I think keeping that communication going for other people, if they can use technology, I think it's ideal. And at least you get to see their face. You know, my eldest daughter's a wonderful singer, and she recorded some songs for Paul to listen to. So we managed to play those to him. The care home managed to play those to him. And the feedback on that was great. They said that he recognised her voice and that he was trying to sing along and everything. So we did use technology in that way, but we just couldn't see him face to face.
So that makes you, especially when you see him smiling, recognising, isn't that, gives you comfort as well, that he's still there, isn't it? There's parts of him and that person that you can tap into, and the care staff can see as well. And
now that restrictions have been lifted a little bit more, I got anxious when they first started saying that we could go in to visit, because I thought, oh, you know, what if I'm not keeping them safe and everything like that. So I had this anxious feeling, but then I asked them if I could take them out of the care home situation, and they said yes, I could take them out for a couple of hours. And if anybody had been watching me trying to get him into the car, they would have been having a good laugh, because he hadn't been out for over 18 months. And he hadn't been in a car for probably about 2 years, and he had forgotten how to get into the car. So I was on my own, and trying to get him into the car was just, I thought, how am I going to do this? And at the beginning, I couldn't get him into the front. He didn't understand. So I tried showing him, and that didn't work. So I thought, right, I've got to be able to get him into the car somehow. So I got myself into the back seat, and I went like that to get him to come in. But instead of, he didn't realise that he had to put his feet in first, so he just came into the car head first, and he ended up just sort of half on the ground and half hanging out the car. So I thought, no, that's not working. So eventually, after about 20 minutes, I managed to get him into the back of the car, and the absolute look of joy on his face, because he was getting driven about in the car, was just wonderful to see. And then I took him home, and we went into the back garden, and our youngest daughter was there, and I must admit, I think he was trying to tell me off, because we have a pond and I'm not the best at looking after it, and it was a bit sort of dirty and grubby and everything, and he was making sounds as if to say, look at the mess of my pond. and my youngest said to me, oh mum, she said, you're in big trouble. But you know, it was so nice. And yeah, I think on a dementia journey, you've got to make the most of the little things, and the joy that he got from just being in the car. To other people, that might not be a big thing, but to me, that was a huge thing. So it's just these little experiences that you need to keep hold of.
I think you've put that so well, and it is, isn't it? It's those little moments that you have are so important. It's the little things that count, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And, making the quality of life, isn't it, as well? And that engagement, coming home to see the pond, that's important to him, and you as a family, and that connection as well, and having that little bit of humour as well about the pond, looking after it.
Yeah. I think humour goes a long way, and even if maybe somebody's not in the best of moods, I used to find that if he wasn't in a good mood, maybe try using humour to turn the situation around. I know it doesn't work for everyone, but you know, sometimes it does help.
Yeah, they often say humour's the best medicine, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much for your time and talking about such a personal subject as well, when it's
You're welcome.
to the diagnosis. And I think our ODS members watching this webinar will get so much out of it, and connection of understanding they're not alone. Those feelings they have, other people feel too. We'll both be on the Q&A panel at the end of the session for any questions that you may have that you want to ask Elaine or myself. Be willing to answer them. So thank you ever so much again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so just to echo those comments of Hannah's too, and we'll have a chance to pick up some of those quite confronting things. And very, very brave of Elaine to come out and say all that. I'm always amazed that people are prepared and able to do that under those circumstances. And interesting comments about music. It's a particular interest of ours. We think about it at a clinical level, but also at a research level. And it's a very interesting idea that may be a way to access people's emotional experiences. So it's still not very well understood, and how best to use that, but we're very interested in it. And the comments about humour is definitely vital. And it is interesting, though, also quite important to keep in mind that also varies between conditions. And people with Alzheimer's and in our world, logopenic aphasia, often do tend to have a well-preserved, relatively well-preserved sense of humour for a long time. Whereas I think, unfortunately, this can be lost in other forms of, particularly in semantic dementia, we do see early changes. So again, everyone's experience is different, and you will all be the experts on that. So now, great pleasure to go to the next item on our agenda, which is an external, well, in this world, of course, we don't know who's external, internal, but Leanne Ruggero is an external luminary. She is a speech and language therapist. In the old country, we call them speech pathologists, who's based in, currently she's doing a PhD. She's gone into the academic and research world at Macquarie University in Sydney. And she's particularly interested in PPA. And actually, she spent a few years working as a speech and language therapist in the UK, in Cambridge, before she went back home to Sydney. And she's a lecturer at Macquarie, where she's helping to spread the word the same way I think that Anna, who's her good friend and colleague, Anna Volkmer, has done for us here, taking the word about, the importance of PPA and the unique needs of PPA into Australia. And we have close links at all sorts of levels with Australia, not just trade contracts. So very, very pleased to have Leanne join us virtually, and particularly focusing on the theme of the meeting, which is really the conceptualization, the measurement, and the experiences of all around quality of life in PPA. So without further ado, hand over to Leanne.
Ruggero. I'm a speech therapist, and I work on PPA as part of my PhD at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. But I actually met Anna Volkmer and some of the team a few years ago when I used to work for the NHS in Cambridgeshire. It's very nice to be here today, and thank you for inviting me to share some updates on my study. I've used a quote from one of my participants to help name this talk. I decided to challenge it all. Experiences of living positively with PPA. So a bit of background about why I've done this study. As a therapist, when you have worked with lots of people, you find that people have different coping strategies. And some people have more or less resilience than others. And when I say resilience, I'm talking about the ability to become strong, healthy, or successful again after something bad happens. But we don't know why people respond differently. I'm keen to know how can we all, speech therapists, other health professionals, people with PPA and their families, help to maximize your ability to live positively. So for this study, I interviewed 10 people with PPA. They were between 1 and 4 years after when their symptoms had started. They were between 60 and 82 years old. I tried to include a wide range of people with PPA. That meant that not all participants could talk in an interview style, but they could understand me and respond in some way. I supported them to participate using speech therapy strategies. Here are the questions that I asked them. How positively are you living with PPA? Tell me about why. What helps you to live positively with PPA? What makes it difficult to live positively with PPA? And what advice would you give to others with PPA? So I'm going to tell you about some of the themes that I developed from the interview analysis. I won't go over all the results today in this short talk, but just some of the key results. There are 6 sub-themes that I'm going to explain in more detail. The first theme is the journey back to a new day-to-day life. So people spoke to me about drawing on their inner strength to get back to day-to-day life. They talked about resilience, having a positive outlook, gratitude and being grateful for the things that you have, having determination, and focusing on now and the present, and deliberately making a decision not to focus as much on the future. So they said things to me like, you've got to have a laugh. I mean, when you've got a problem like this, I think it's better just to be positive and go with it. I had one gentleman who told me that he had done a lot of traveling around the third world. He said, what I ponder occasionally is that it could have been much worse. And one other lady who told me, my determination to challenge it got me out of a dark place. The next sub-theme I'll share with you is called the best things you can do. So many told me about the fact that it was very important to them to keep busy and to have hobbies. What those hobbies were very individual from one person to the next. But the common message was that it's really good to keep busy and do the things that are meaningful to you. And that might mean that with PPA, you have to change or adjust some of your old hobbies so that you can still maintain them. For example, I had one lady told me she still loved to watch films, but that she would put the subtitles on because that made it easier to understand. One gentleman told me he still loved to get out on his motorbike because that didn't require talking. Participants also spoke to me about the importance of having a support network, and one specifically that was engaged and really there for them. For some people, this was family or friends. Other people spoke about how they enjoyed support groups, even though they hadn't expected that they would really like them that much. It was a nice surprise for them. And other people also spoke about their relationships with their doctor or other health professionals, and the fact that if someone took the time to understand PPA and communicate with them clearly, that meant a lot. The last theme I'll tell you about is called It's Your Journey. Everyone is individual. So you might have PPA, but that doesn't mean that everybody is living exactly the same situation. People emphasized to me that you need to find the things that work for you, but also that you need to have the self-awareness and courage to say no to things sometimes. So some people were very keen to do lots of speech therapy practice, and it gave them a sense of purpose, while others felt that doing deliberate daily practice wasn't for them, and they would rather spend their time doing something more enjoyable to them. Some people wanted to go out and do activities like golf, the cinema, swimming, or travel, while others said they liked to limit how many things they scheduled every day or every week to conserve their energy and reduce fatigue. For them, they were not avoiding going out in a negative way, but they were pacing themselves as a positive coping strategy. So to sum all of this up, this is the first study of this type, asking a group of people with PPA about their experiences. I found that people with PPA of all types can be supported in interviews to tell us about their experiences and their preferences. Despite having aphasia and the individual challenges that all of them had experienced, all 10 participants were able to identify some things that made it easier to be positive, which I felt was a really lovely and heartwarming thing for them to have shared with me. So I am very grateful to the participants that took part in this study with me. What are the implications of this study? I hope that we can use the results to increase awareness about living with PPA and what are some helpful strategies. And we could increase awareness among health professionals and also as education for newly diagnosed people and their families. I also hope we can use these results to develop new treatments to promote living positively. Thank you very much for inviting me and for your time. And big thanks to my participants who gave me their time and their stories. And a big thanks go to my PhD supervisors, Professor Lindsay Nichols and Dr. Karen Crude. I am seeing people with PPA at the moment for similar studies on quality of life. If you would like to be involved in my research, I can give you more information. Just contact me with my email, or I'm sure that one of the team members at UCL can put you into contact with me. Thank you.
Well, many thanks indeed, Leanne. And Leanne will, I think, be joining as part of our panel discussion along with Anna and Alison and Elaine. and I will be joining as well. Chris is chairing. So this is usually quite a popular part of the segment of the meeting, and we are running slightly over time thanks to the chairing. So I think we should crack on without too much further ado. So the Q&A, Chris, I'll hand over to you and wait to be called upon.
Thanks very much, Jason, and thanks so much for all of the speakers in that first session. That was I learned so much from that. So yeah, thank you all for your time and your expertise. So I think all the panelists have now been introduced, so I won't delay any further, and I'll spring into our first question, which is that it has been suggested that cognitive benefits can result from physical exercising. Exercise can improve the body, so why not the brain? And does diet also have a beneficial result? So I might come to you, Alison, first, if that's okay, to talk about the diet, and Jason and Elaine, I might call on you as well after Alison's had her turn.
Yeah, very interesting question. And yes, I'd agree completely. What you eat does have an impact on how well your brain functions, particularly people who are less well nourished, malnourished. Actually, there is a definite correlation between people not being able to function as well because they aren't getting all of the nutrition that their bodies need. And interestingly, there is a big correlation just in general in older age between activity and nutritional intake too, which is something I think it's been, you know, there's been an awareness about it for a long time, but I'm not sure as a population we're particularly aware about it. So it's something actually that within one of the specialist groups I'm a member of, we're actually working on things around that at the moment. But I think it is about having a good range of nutrients in the diet as much as possible, having sort of lots of different food groups represented to really try and support the brain as much as possible. The one thing to say on this is there is no such thing as a brain food. There are no such things as superfoods. So anything that you read that says eat this food and it will all be magical, sadly, that is not true. But what it does mean is that, yeah, there's no one solution, but that's also a good thing because it means that a range of different foods are likely to help anybody in the basically who's trying to improve their nutritional intake. But it's largely about if you can keep your body healthy, it will help to keep your mind as healthy as it can be.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Alison. And Elaine, I don't know if you have anything to add from your personal experience of Paul and exercise and his diet. Oh, and sorry, I think you might be muted, by the way.
Sorry, is that better?
Perfect.
Exercise is very important. We had a Labrador and Paul took it upon himself every day to walk the dog twice, 3 times a day. And that kept him fit and healthy. He used to walk for miles with the dog. But sadly, we had to have the dog put down, and I noticed a decline in him when he was no longer able to do that. So I think, yeah, regular exercise is very important.
Thank you. And Jason, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think the advice is very general. I would agree with all those things, and I don't think that there's any particular evidence, unfortunately, that you can kind of exercise to produce really specific brain benefit. I think it's more that if you don't exercise, don't remain physically as well as mentally active, you kind of can succumb to all the other things that go with having one of these conditions around things like, you know, just general physical deconditioning, loss of social interaction, all those other things, rather than it being a very specific evidence of benefit, unfortunately. And the same would sort of go for diet too. I'm not aware, echoing what others have said, that there's a specific benefit, although we often get asked that question. I think unfortunately, with PPA, it's often the flip side. What we're trying to do is really preserve good nutrition in the face of sometimes very challenging problems, not just, you know, mechanical ones with swallowing, they can be very significant, but also around people's motivation to eat and the types of food that they want to eat as well. So we do need to keep very vigilant to maintain nutrition rather than, unfortunately, using nutrition as a positive force for good. But the theme of today's meeting, though, nutrition and emotional well-being, you might think that those things are a little bit disparate. But I was thinking about this as I was listening to people talk, and actually, of course, eating has got a massive kind of social resonance for people, and it's really important to emotional well-being. So actually, one of the most important things we do, you know, in music, is we often talk about, but eating and the kind of conviviality that goes with it in the normal world is very important. So I do think that actually is a dimension that we sometimes ignore.
Thanks, Jason. I can see Alison nodding along very vigorously there, so I think you've struck a chord. Okay, let's move on to another question. So this person says, this is quite a nice one. Can we train our brain to be happy or happier in our later stage PPA? And Leanne, I wonder if I could come to you first, because I think this maybe touches on some of the research that you were just taking us through. And yes, then after you, anyone else who'd like to come in. But after you, Leanne.
Yes, sure. I think that's a great question. I actually think one of the most important things about trying to be more positive if you're living with something like dementia, you've already done the first step, which is asking the question. And a lot of the people that I see who are struggling, they haven't got to the point yet where they have been able to ask the question, how can I help myself? What can I try? That you almost have to put your problem solving hat on a little bit for yourself. The answers are different for everyone. And I know Elaine spoke about this earlier when she talked about, and Alison as well, a lot of things in dementia care are about trial and error. It's finding the things that help you to feel happier and more positive. There's no one key ingredient I can give anyone. That said, if you put me on the spot and ask me to give you one, what I would say is mindfulness training. Other people have written about the fact that something called acceptance and commitment therapy might be very good for PPA. Now that's something that you access through a psychologist, and it's an umbrella term for some different therapies, but one of the main ingredients of that is mindfulness. And I think mindfulness helps to encourage a lot of the inner strengths that I talked about in my presentation. Things like resilience, being in the present moment, and having a positive outlook. There's not too much research on mindfulness and PPA yet, but what we know about mindfulness in general and mindfulness in some other people with communication difficulties is that it does train your brain to strengthen the connections that help you to feel a little bit lighter and more in the moment. So if you put me on the spot, that would be one of my strong suggestions. Hope that's helpful.
That's great, and thank you for anticipating that I might put you on the spot. So that's saves me a job. Fantastic. Did anyone else want to add anything to that lovely answer from Leanne? Yes, Hannah Gardner.
Yeah, I suppose it's important, especially when it gets to the later stages as well, is having that support network around you as well, and other professionals that can help you live well and positively as well. Things like OT and your environment that you live in, that can help your mind physically and emotionally as well. To support you at that stages and educate people about what you are finding difficult, and that eases the pressure and that makes you feel better, and better understanding from others is important too.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, Hannah. Jason.
Just to say, to plug your research, Chris, really, I really think this is a classic issue area where you really do need to tailor the kind of intervention to the stage and the type of PPA, because you know, there are people that particularly, you know, early on would absolutely be benefiting from that, and then there might be people with other types of problems, and particularly maybe a bit later where they need a different kind of help. And actually some of the mindfulness aspects are really also, of course, very much can be directed to people who are living with the person, which is the other massive issue, of course, that we don't want to disregard. I'm sure certainly none of the panel will disregard this, that you kind of got looking at kind of, you know, also supporting and kind of involving for their emotional well-being the people who are living with the person who actually has PPA. So those are reasons why, the reason I'm plugging your research is because we actually need a lot more information about staging the disease and working out how we really target appropriately and in a focused way without wasting anyone's time, you know, the best type of intervention for the type.
Thank you, Jason. And Anna.
I just also wanted to mention that from a lot of the work I've done with people with PPA and with other speech and language therapists, people often have asked me how they could live well. And one of the things they've also commented on is how they can live well within their relationships. And I think, Elaine, you described how you did that together as a family. And I think that kind of sits really well alongside what everybody else has mentioned, in terms of it being, it's important to tailor what we do to the individual. And so this is something that as speech and language therapists, we often find ourselves doing, is working on how people communicate within their relationships to help people maintain these relationships so they can live well. There's a bit of a different angle rather than training your brain through these kind of meditation tasks. It's a bit of a different angle to helping people do that in everyday life. I just wanted to add that into the mix.
That's great. Thank you very much, Anna. And actually, just to pick up on one of the points that Jason mentioned about the stages of PPA, we had another question come in asking, is there a framework with stage of development against which I can map my wife's progression? My wife was diagnosed with PPA non-fluent variant in August 2019. So some of you might be aware that this is something we are really trying hard to do, and we have over the last year and a half, 2 years, we've come up with some stages of the different PPA variants. We've got a lot of feedback from PPA support group webinars and from members from you, and we're now at the point where we're trying to work out just how good the stages we've got are. So we've got a PhD student, a computer scientist, doing some computational modeling of the data that we've collected. We hope very, very soon that we'll have some idea of how good these stages are. We've also brought together a team of collaborators across the world, actually, across Australia, America, and all of Europe. And they very kindly agreed to help us to test these stages in the people, in their support group members in their countries as well. So we know how important this piece of work is. So we know it's really important for people living with PPA and then their friends and families to know, or to have an idea of what might be coming next. And it's something that we really hope to be able to update you on properly soon. And we've talked about maybe theming the next webinar or the one after that around this very topic about staging PPA. So just wanted to mention that as it was raised. Okay, so we'll move on to another question. So this person says, I am living with a diagnosis of PPA and have significant speech impairment. Is there any medication I can take that might help my symptoms? So Jason, I'll come to you for that one, and then I'll also come to the speech and language therapists to talk about the non-pharmacological advice that you might give to somebody in that situation. But Jason, any medications that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think I need to hand over to Leanne and Anna as soon as possible with this question, because it's very much around speech and language therapy is the key plank for this, rather than medication. And I think, unfortunately, what we can do with medication presently is quite limited. The kind of slight exceptions would be people who are significantly depressed and often stop sort of talking and interacting may well benefit from treating that aspect, and that will then benefit their communication. And the other class of medication we can sometimes use is the cholinesterase inhibitor medication, donepezil being the most widely used tablet that we use for Alzheimer's, and we would use that, well, predominantly in logopenic aphasia, which is usually a variant of Alzheimer's disease. But I have to say, and I'm sure everyone on the call will know this, it's modest. You know, it isn't really a kind of certainly not a wonder drug for language, and it's not really language directed specifically, unfortunately. Chris and others have shown that there are some quite interesting specific benefits that it may have, but it's much more, that medication is much more again around kind of, we think more around sort of general orientation and attention to the task, etc. So I don't think it's really a medication linked issue so much at the moment, unfortunately. But maybe, I don't know, Anna and Leanne, got any comments about that?
A lot of the team that I have worked with over the past 10 years have focused on researching something we call impairment-based therapies. And Anna's strengths and research have focused on what we call functional therapies. So that might be a nice way to split up this question, Anna, if I go first. We know that when people are having trouble finding the right words or pronouncing them properly or fitting those words into a fluent sentence, we know that you can rehearse words and actually get a lot better at saying those words. It won't last forever, those improvements, but it will last as long as you are doing the practice for. But you also can't practice every single word that you might need to use. So what we tend to tell people is, if they are someone that's keen to practice some words so that they're easier to say, that they choose words which are really relevant to their day-to-day life. So that might just be things that help you order a cup of tea at your favorite cafe, or a phrase that you like to say to your grandchildren. Rather than practicing everything, we try and help people to sit down and brainstorm what are some key things that are really important to you, and we can do some deliberate practice on those words to help them be easier to say. We know that that works. However, it won't work forever. You have to keep doing the practice. And that's where the work that Anna has focused on actually comes in.
Yeah, that's thank you, Leanne. That's a great introduction. So, and I sometimes find that when I'm working with people, we might do some work like Leanne has described when I'm working with people clinically, but sometimes people don't want to keep practicing, or sometimes it's just not their cup of tea. So we also know that there are other interventions that we can use. We call them functional interventions because we often think of them as being focused on your day-to-day, your functional life in every day. And when we look at the research evidence in this area, this is quite young, even younger than everything else in PPA. So it's only in the last few years, really. And what we find is that the work that's been done is quite diverse, so lots of different things. But what we know is that when we do these therapies, we find it really important to work with the person and the people around the person. So work with their close family members, their friends. And we also find it really helpful to work on strategies or things that person is already using in everyday life. So, for example, I was working with somebody recently, and they were saying, well, I sometimes write down a word for my other half, and it seems to really help. What do you think of that? So using that strategy, we started thinking about when else they could write that down and how they could write things down to make it even more useful and quicker, and whether we could even do shortcuts and prepare things in advance. And we also looked at actually, if the partner was writing down, well, what else could they be doing if it was the partner doing the things to help a conversation. So a lot of my work, as I mentioned before, is often with the person, but also with the other people in that person's life. And I think it's really important to come back to what Jason said right at the beginning. And when we were talking, I think on the first question, is when we plan therapy like this, we have to tailor it to a person's, not only to their needs in terms of their communication, but also to what's important. And we know from both impairment-based therapies that Leanne described and from the therapies I described, that actually these are only really going to be successful if we make them valuable to you and your life. So it's really important for us to plan what we do together with a person.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. And not wanting to embarrass Anna or Leanne, but they're both sort of world-respected experts in this area, and it's really a pleasure and a privilege to have you both here, as it is to have all of the panel here. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise. We'll move on. We've got, as we might have predicted, we've got more questions than we'll have time to answer. So just wanted to reassure people, please do keep sending your questions through. We will find a way to answer them, either via a subsequent video session or by writing answers and circulating them after the meeting. I'm going to come to you next, Alison, and also to Jason. So this person's asked, do people living with PPA have experience with weight loss and muscle tone? And does that lead to then struggling with stability resulting in falls? So Alison, I wondered if you could talk perhaps about the weight loss, and then Jason, if you can add in after Alison's had her turn.
No problem, thank you. Yes, weight loss is a particular problem in most forms of dementia. It's not specific just to PPA. This is very well recognised, and it's something that, it's one of those things, as I say, it's very well recognised by clinicians working in this field, but actually I'd say it's not very well recognised by most other people as being a part of the disease process. And so it can be something that people sort of don't almost recognise as an aspect of it and don't necessarily think of as being a particular problem. This, I would say, going outside of the realms of dementia, if we look at the older adult population in the UK, we don't tend to recognise that unplanned weight loss in older adults is a problem either. We tend to just see that as a normal part of the ageing process, which it isn't. And so actually a lot of this really is about sort of our own perceptions of what is normal and what isn't. So that kind of is put to one side. Yes, it does happen. And yes, it's something that we do need to pay attention to and we can do something about. And it is about going back to the foods that the person is able to eat, that they're willing to eat. It's going back to having a range of different nutrients, particularly foods that are good sources of protein. So that's the things like meat, cheese, eggs, fish, nuts, pulses, those sort of things, as part of the diet. And it doesn't just have to be at meals. Snacks in between meals can be really helpful. Drinks that are high in nutrition, basically anything based on milk effectively, are also going to be good. And all of these can help to maintain muscle mass if exercise and activity are undertaken at the same time, because nutrition on its own won't maintain muscle mass. You need exercise at the same time, sort of in combination. If you can do that, then yes, that should help to prevent and slow down weight loss and slow down and prevent muscle loss. And if you can prevent the muscle loss and maintain activity, that will help to reduce your risk of falls as well. The other thing around falls is good hydration, drinking enough. And again, it's important at this point to say with hydration, we don't just mean water, we mean all drinks. So all drinks are based on water, basically. The reason a fluid is because there's water in it. So whatever you drink, you're going to get some water from it. It's all fluid. It's all what we're talking about when we're discussing hydration. And basically, drinking enough to meet your body's needs will help to also reduce the risk of falling as well, because dehydration is known to be a risk of falling. This is a particular issue for, again, all older people, because as we age, we lose our thirst receptors, or our ability to recognize thirst. And so that by the time an older person without dementia, by the time an older person who feels thirsty, the likelihood is they're probably already dehydrated. So actually older people need to drink because they need to drink, not just because they feel thirsty. And the same thing will apply for people living with PPA as well. So it's encouraging it, but it's making it a part of the normal day. So you have a drink because it's time to have a drink. And so it's that sort of encouragement. And again, maintaining hydration levels can really help to reduce risk of falls too.
Thank you very much, Alison. That was a wonderful answer. And I should just quickly flag that we have recorded a much longer interview with Alison, between Alison and Anna, as part of our Conversations with Experts series, and that will be available, we hope, very soon on our website. We'll circulate a link when it's ready. It's an amazing 90 minutes or so, and Alison and Anna throw each other some questions on behalf of our members, and the breadth of their knowledge and flexibility in their answers is really amazing. I think it's something that a lot of people will benefit from. So we'll circulate that when it's ready. Jason, did you have anything to add to what Alison had said?
It's a very good answer and very complete. I suppose as a neurologist, we tend to try to identify things that you might be more specific and may actually be helpable. And I think apart from the mechanical issues around kind of, the fact that someone might be struggling with nutritional weight because they're not getting enough food, that's a very big area in its own right. But I also think there are certainly, we see this with people with somatic dementia, for example, who have aversions to food for various reasons, and also the issues of kind of the preference that someone has. It's very important to get food that they like. I mean, we all use food as comfort. It's a massive source of pleasure. And if that's disrupted, it can rapidly, and appetite starts to suffer, inanition and weight loss can rapidly follow. And the other thing I'd say more as a general medic, though, is it's very important that we don't assume, and I'm quite sure no one on the panel would ever assume this, that it's weight loss is, oh, well, that's just their dementia. It's very important, if it's significant ongoing weight loss, to have it investigated, because it might be something else. People in this age group are prone to all sorts of other things that can cause weight loss. And actually, by the way, one of the questions was about tiredness. I saw the same thing goes actually for that. Yes, we do get people who get sleep disruption and fatigue for various reasons from their dementia, but significant ongoing fatigue, checking their blood counts and those sorts of things become important, because it might be something else. So the GP is also very important in that aspect of things.
That's great. Thank you, Jason. And so I think we'll go to our final question, which Elaine, I'm going to direct to you if that's okay. So somebody has written in to ask, how do you cope with the stress of Paul having to hand over things that he used to do to you? So things, the examples they gave were everyday things like paying bills or arranging things that he may have used to have done. And how did that change in your relationship? How did you manage that?
In the beginning, I found that very difficult, because Paul used to deal with all that side of our relationship. I just had to get on with it. If he wasn't able to do it, then I had to step up. And by the time we realised that, he couldn't do it any longer, he couldn't really show me what I needed to do. So it was a case of just contacting everybody, like the bank. Once I got the powers of attorney for the financial, especially the financial one, contacting places like the banks, all the insurance companies, everything like that, and telling them that Paul had dementia. And some of them wanted a copy of the power of attorney. So I would say that when you do your financial power of attorney, get a few copies, and they've got to be certified, and send them off. But once all that was in place, I've had no problems since then. But it was a bit of an issue when people would phone to speak to him from insurance companies or the life insurance people, and they were insistent that they would speak to him. And I used to get quite cross, and I would try to explain, and they would say, no, I need to speak to him. And I said, well, fair enough then, here's the phone, do your best. And that was probably quite rude of me, but in the end, that was that was how I was dealing with it until I got everything sorted out. But it is a long process, and just take your time and focus on one item at a time. So get your bank accounts in order. And then if you've got life insurance and your household insurance, anything like that, that maybe your loved one dealt with all the time, but just take it in little chunks. Don't try not to get overwhelmed with looking at the bigger picture. Just take it in little steps. But it is stressful. And even talking to people, I used to say, I have to talk for 2 people, and it was draining. I found that exhausting, having to think for 2 people, having to talk for 2 people. And it is exhausting, but if you take it in little steps, and there's no rush, just, you know, trial and error, go with flow.
Thank you very much, Elaine. And yes, Hannah Gardner, I think you want to come in.
Yeah, I think what Elaine's saying, it's very challenging as the roles change as well, but it's also important if you are struggling to reach out to other people and get support of understanding processes and systems, and like Rare Dementia Support Direct team to offer that support. And like Elaine said perfectly, is setting that list and not being too overwhelmed by it, and setting yourself realistic goals and setting those, and you can tick them off the list, and then you feel like you're processing things, going through things that need to be done. But it's so important if you are struggling, is to get support and help, and there's lots of different services and support out there.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And I thank you very much to all of our panelists. It's 11:30, so I think we should leave it there. As said, we will get to the questions that we haven't got to today in some way. So Jason, yes, sorry, I'll hand back to you to close.
No, so I won't delay people. Just to again echo those comments. Thanks so much, particularly to our special guests, to Elaine, Leanne, and Alison, but also to the team again. And particularly to all of you, I don't want to forget that, you know, you're very, very vital, really integral to certainly our research and to keeping this particular exercise going. And we thank you all. We do appreciate it, even though sometimes it gets lost in all the excitement, perhaps. I wanted to make one shameless plug, which is that I do really hope that all of you are getting vaccinated. And you know, we all hope we're on the way out of this awful thing that we've been in. But I do think that it's most important, and particularly for people that might be vulnerable. So that's a plug, but please do take up that offer. Hopefully most people have been vaccinated now. And I'll close. I need to alert you to a brief message from our sponsor. And these things people tend to sort of think, oh, well, you know, that's just something that they tacked on at the end. But this is really quite important. So really do hope you'll stay on. It's a very short video to close now from the National Brain Appeal, and they are a vital support to us and fund a lot of the work in the background that we do. So please do stay for that short video. But meanwhile, I think it's goodbye from us, and take care.
Hello, my name is Eva Tate, and I'm the Major Appeals Manager and Manager of the Rare Dementia Support Fund, held by the charity the National Brain Appeal. The National Brain Appeal raises money as the dedicated charity for the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery and UCL Queen's Square Institute of Neurology. The National Brain Appeal raises funds for Rare Dementia Support's 2,000 members to help individuals living with rare and early onset forms of dementia, their families, friends, and healthcare professionals. And we also hold several other funds for FTD and dementia research. The funding helps not only the support group meetings in London, but also the regional support groups, admin and support staff, and all other associated expenses, including the new online support groups. When things return to normal, there are travel and accommodation bursaries available to help members attend the meetings. This year, we've raised our fundraising target to 300,000, and this will rise further to 350,000 by 2022 to develop and extend the service in the areas of education, support, and research, with the ultimate aim that everyone affected by a form of rare dementia will have access to specialist information and support, as well as contact with other people with a similar condition. We apply for grants from grant-making trusts, foundations and livery companies, and have a wonderful group of supporters, some of whom are here today, who fundraise for us in an amazing variety of ways. We would love it if you would like to sign up to our RDS fundraising newsletter to hear more of these stories and receive news of how we can support this community. We have had people do head shaves for us. We have had a gentleman drive across the Mongolian steppe in a VW Polo, and we have lots of people who take part in runs and virtual runs as well. At the end of February, we held a gala dinner called Mission Possible, where we raised 110,000 for the expansion of rare dementia support. And we are delighted to announce that in line with this expansion, the charity is committed to raise up to 7 million to create the world's first centre of excellence for rare dementias. If anyone would like to discuss any fundraising ideas or the new capital appeal, please do feel free to email me or my colleague Alexis, our Senior Fundraising Manager, who will speak about the innovative new ways you can be involved in fundraising for RDS, even during this challenging time. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Alexis Gebby and I'm the Senior Fundraising Officer at the National Brain Appeal. I just want to start off by saying a huge thank you to all of you who already fundraise for RDS. We really appreciate all of your incredible efforts, especially at this difficult time. My role at the National Brain Appeal is to look after all the amazing people taking on various fundraising activities for us. We have had people challenging themselves to run marathons, cycle long distances, climb mountains, and even take on skydives, all whilst raising money for RDS. We also have wonderful fundraisers out in the community who organise golf days, hold coffee mornings, host choir and carol concerts, and even shave their heads. These people ensure that more people like you can be supported through rare dementia support. If you're interested in becoming one of our fundraising heroes, then please do contact me. I am here to support you with your fundraising, and I'm more than happy to chat about any ideas that you may have. While at the moment it isn't possible to take part in a sporting challenge or hold a big fundraising gathering in your local community, we do have some fundraising ideas, such as taking on a solo virtual run or walk, hosting a quiz for your friends or family online, asking for birthday donations in lieu of going out, or even donating money that you may be saving by not travelling to work or buying your daily coffee. Do get in touch with me if you would like to get involved. In the meantime, take care and we hope to see you soon.